after the news broke this afternoon.
Hillary Clinton's corruption is on a scale we have never seen before. We must not let her take her criminal scheme into the Oval Office.
During an appearance today in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Secretary Clinton didn't mention the FBI's decision, and the New York Times cites federal law enforcement officials who said the new emails were discovered after the Bureau seized electronic devices belonging to Huma Abedin, an aide to Mrs. Clinton, and her husband, disgraced former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner. Donald Trump is pulled to within 7 points of Hillary Clinton in Virginia. That's according to a new poll by the Wasson Center at Christopher Newport University. It shows Clinton ahead of Trump 46% to 39%. Trump had trailed by 12 points in the same poll last week. Up for grabs in Virginia, 13 electoral votes. The United Nations has voted Russia off the Human Rights Council. It's a stunning rebuke for Moscow, which is accused of war crimes over its actions in Syria. Russia lost its regional seat to Hungary and Croatia. Russia's UN ambassador Vitaly Churkin is playing down the importance of the move. The Pentagon has canceled 22 programs in advanced development after spending a combined $58.3 billion on them since 2002. That's according to the Defense Department's latest assessment of its acquisition performance. Among the weapons scrapped, Boeing's ground-based vehicle network for the Army and Northrop Grumman's mini-submarine for Navy SEALs. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
We're 30 minutes from the close of trading here in the United States, live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm Scarlet.
I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Oliver Rennick.
U.S. equities erased gains and are set for their longest losing streak since June.
But the question is, what'd you miss?
The FBI has uncovered new evidence in its investigation of Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server and is reopening its investigation. Word of the FBI's renewed investigation sent U.S. shares dropping from near-session highs. Mexico's PESO, seen as a proxy for market perception on the U.S. presidential race, slumped against major currencies. And we're going to have full coverage of this dramatic development as we count you down to today's U.S. closing bell.
All right, as we head towards the close, take a look at where the major indexes stand. When the headline broke that the FBI was looking into new emails, we saw a leg lower in equity indexes, and then they kind of stabilized. They took another leg down once again. At its low point, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was trading at, let me pull it up, 18,094. And in terms of what that meant for a point drop, that was a 74-point decline, off by 0.4%. We've recovered a big chunk of that. You can see the Dow Industrial is now positive on the day. In terms of volume, it's really been picking up today, especially in the afternoon. The trading participation is now 20% higher than the 20-day average. So what is usually a slow Friday, and of course it's been kind of slow on the political front as well these last couple of days, has really changed gears in these last couple of hours. You're looking there at the S&P 500 inching back, still off, though, by 0.2%.
So a little bit still in the red, but not quite to the extent we saw earlier. And as we've been reporting, the FBI is reopening Hillary Clinton. And then right there, as you were just pointing out, just to nail the hammer in here, Mexican peso, pretty big jump up, still higher than it was. I mean, this is relative, right? This is dollar peso, so this is a weaker peso we're looking at.
And to explain why that matters, right? A lot of people look at the peso as a proxy for Donald Trump. Right. Should he win, it weakens. Should he lose, it gets stronger. And we saw at the same time a drop in the S&P when these Clinton headlines came out, when these FBI headlines came out, and a jump or a drop in the peso, so a jump in the dollar versus the peso.
Yep. And then you also
to confirm exactly what's moving markets.
Right. And then also some strength in the bond market as well. All right, so to continue talking about that and get the latest on what's happening with this new information about the Clinton emails is Alex Wayne. He's with Bloomberg in Washington. Alex, we're just seeing some headlines cross about the device associated with this latest batch of emails, I guess, that the FBI wants to look at. Can you give us some insight on where the story's going?
The New York Times just reported that these new emails were discovered in the course of the investigation into Anthony Weiner's sexting. So this is quite a turn for a campaign that's already seen quite a few turns.
So it was an incidental thing then. They weren't seeking out new Clinton emails. This wasn't part of the earlier sort of investigation. This was something totally separate, and they stumbled upon it.
Yeah, you know, it's so unclear what's going on here. It would be really helpful if maybe the FBI would actually tell us something, sort of explain what the heck they're up to. Comey issued this letter, apparently, according to Newsweek, basically because he had to. He testified on this case to Congress a couple of months ago, and under Justice Department rules, this is according to Newsweek, he had to update Congress on any developments in the investigation because of that prior testimony. So he apparently gave them.
Here for a moment, Alex.
Yeah.
What he said was, although the FBI cannot yet assess whether or not this material may be significant, and I cannot predict how long it'll take us to complete this additional works, I believe it is important to update, and that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah,
he didn't give any details. He didn't give any timeline, and so it raised a lot of questions and really didn't give any answers.
Yeah, he seems to have provided as little information as he basically provided as much information as he had to, I think, and no more than that. We've described it as the investigation being reopened. He didn't use that word. Jason Chaffetz, a congressman from Utah who is chairman of the Oversight Committee, used that word. So,
well, Alex, he did say, I'll quote directly from the letter, the FBI should take appropriate investigative steps designed to allow investigators to review these emails.
Right.
So that he's essentially saying he's going to start investigating. Whether you want to call that a reopening, the FBI investigating, I think that's pretty pedantic.
It's news, regardless.
No, I mean, he's saying they will continue investigating this. So
yeah, they're investigating.
If you don't want to call that reopening, what do you want to call it?
I think what we would, I think probably what it should be called is that they're looking at new emails discovered in an unrelated investigation. Yeah.
So apart from the semantics, what do you think? I mean, obviously, there's a big conversation now that immediately right after this, people started speculating on whether or not, or rather, commenting on whether or not Comey should even be, giving these kind of grandiose announcements or making this, as public as it is. But I feel like you could, there's both sides of that, right? Is there a precedent in any way for a presidential candidate, especially one that, who's polling so strongly, that is still under this type of investigation? Does he have not some kind of obligation to keep the people informed, or should this be sort of something that's kept between the FBI and Congress?
The only obligation here, apparently, was that, according to Justice Department rules, he had to keep Congress apprised in the investigation once he testified to them about it. Other than that, I don't think he was required to disclose anything to the public. This letter was first made public by Congress.
Are there any calls for FBI Director James Comey to speak publicly on this and answer more questions?
Yes, we're calling
sure
for that
by the
right
press. I'd like him to do that. Yeah, it's difficult for him. He's already under a lot of fire just for talking publicly about this case in the first place. The FBI usually does not describe to the public the course of an investigation until it's over, and they either make charges or they don't, or even if they don't make charges, they often don't even tell the public that much. They often only tell us about cases they're investigating when they charge someone. So we already know a lot more about this case than we normally would about a criminal investigation.
Alex, what do you think about the strategic decision? It seems it's been made campaign-wide for Hillary Clinton to ignore this issue when she goes on a stump speech. Bill Clinton also said nothing about it. He went and gave a speech right after this was announced. And we know that Clinton surrogates who had been booked previously to discuss other issues have now canceled those appointments because of this and their unwillingness to talk about it.
Yeah, it's tough. I think probably the Clinton campaign knows about as much about this as we do. So they're scrambling, I'm sure, to figure out what the FBI is looking at and how it affects their candidate. I don't fault her too much for going to a rally an hour or two after the news broke and sort of pretending it didn't happen. A political rally is probably not the right venue to address this. But it would be nice to
not
see
even
the
a
campaign
comment to
say
get it out of the
something.
way. You know, I mean, everybody there is thinking, "Wow, I wonder what she's going to say about the emails."
Yeah.
You know, it's a bombshell, and to completely ignore it, does it not seem kind of pre-programmed and robotic and exactly the way she doesn't want to be perceived?
Probably to some people, yeah. It didn't surprise me that she wouldn't bring it up at a political rally like that immediately after it happened.
Alex, question, I'm about as far from a security expert as you can get, but so they're looking at emails that they found on Anthony Weiner's cell phone. So I guess
according
now,
to the Times,
right? This is according to the New York Times report. So if those are indeed classified, then it's very unlikely that those are on some kind of a secure server, right? I mean, they found them on a phone.
Yeah, if they're on Weiner's cell phone, they weren't on any kind of a secure device. He wasn't a government official during the period that I think the FBI is investigating. But again, all of this is really, really unclear. The New York Times reported that they seized devices from Huma Abedin as well. She may have had a secure device, although if this happened in the last couple of years, she wouldn't have, because she wasn't part of the government as of about 4 years ago.
All right, Alex, well, I know there's little information. We don't want to make you speculate too much. Thanks so much for joining and talking about that with us. That's Alex Wayne of Bloomberg News. And we'll, of course, continue to bring all the latest developments on this issue.
And we have some other breaking news as well. It's some headlines out of OPEC. They were meeting in Vienna today and also tomorrow, and they have ended their meeting, according to a delegate. They are said to have not reached any final deal on country limits, but they did make progress on their agreement. Of course, back in Algiers, the oil cartel agreed to cut production, but they didn't really have any details. They didn't decide which country or how much each country was going to cut by, and apparently they're making progress on that agreement, but have not yet reached a final deal. You can see that NYMEX crude down 2%, and this was before the headlines came out. We will continue to cover these breaking stories for you. This is Bloomberg. continuing to monitor the headlines after the FBI sent a letter to Congress saying it is looking into new emails related, or I should say in an unrelated case that could be linked to their previous investigation into Hillary Clinton and her use of a private email server. The White House has now offered comment. What we know is that they say that they're not in a position to second-guess the FBI's work on Hillary Clinton. The New York Times, Oliver and Matt, has reported that the emails here are not from Hillary Clinton's server, but in fact, they're from Anthony Weiner's cell phone. Anthony Weiner, of course, was married to Huma Abedin, who is one of Hillary Clinton's closest advisors.
Right.
Until very recently, right? Did they not just very recently split up?
They're not.
So they're still married.
Yep.
You've also got White House spokesman Eric Schultz talking to reporters as well. Maybe we'll get some color there. Obviously, we know that President Obama has been on the road and was planning to rather, continue to support Clinton's campaign. In terms of the market reaction, it seems like a lot of it has been erased. As we mentioned before, we kind of had a little bit of a sell-off in stocks. Some of those sectors went down quite a bit. Then it bounced back, a little bit of a bid into sort of the safer assets. You saw gold go up a little bit. You saw Treasury yields go down a little bit. Ultimately, 15 minutes to close, and we're pretty close to unchanged on the day. So it doesn't seem like people are panicking too much, though that initial sell-off was pretty impressive.
Well, maybe, they got right. Maybe those people bought enough protection that they're not going to worry too much. We did see the VIX go up at one point 13%.
Right.
It's still up 8%.
And that's the thing, is that, even though we're now back to unchanged here, this just gives you an idea of what could potentially happen and how much the market right now is pricing in an assumed Clinton win. So this could just be the tip of the iceberg if there's an even bigger surprise.
All right, well, to continue this conversation, let's bring in Julian Emanuel of UBS Equity and Derivative Strategist. And we had booked you before any of this email business came out, or these headlines came out in the last 2 hours. What do you make of this? How does it change your view, if at all?
It really doesn't change our view very much at all. We did some work about a month ago that showed when polling had candidates' differentials less than 10% in the month prior to the election, the expectation would be an uncertain outcome, more market volatility, perhaps even market volatility extending after the election. But if anything, the fact that, as we've seen, the market's resilient in the face of this obviously greater uncertainty tells you that the underlying trend, the important thing for the market in 17, is earnings and the economy, both of which look very good at this point.
So, first of all, I know it's your favorite thing as a market strategist to come on and talk about markets and then have to pivot to politics. But when you just keep it with it for 1 second, is there any concern from a bullish investor standpoint? If you're long on the market right now, is there any concern? Do you have to rethink perhaps the assumption that's baked in about who's going to win? Because it seems like that jolt there, yeah, we're back to even, but it's still a pretty dramatic jolt, as we were just talking about, and it wasn't even the sectors that people associate with being negative under a Clinton presidency. It was just everything. Everything just sold off real quick.
The concern is, as it always is with markets, a sense of greater uncertainty. Markets do not tend to respond favorably to greater uncertainty, and you can actually see that. You can see that in the currency markets. The dollar was actually weak against everything except the Mexican peso for obvious reasons. But there's definitely going to be an expectation of nervousness into the vote, and again, perhaps beyond.
I just wanted to bring up a chart that you shared with us, which shows...
Actually, you know what? Before you do that, let me just break in here, because John Podesta, chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign, has released a statement. Here's what he is saying. Let's just pull this up. He is saying that it is extraordinary that Director James Comey of the FBI took this action, and it happens near the election. He says Comey should provide the public more information. He also says that he is confident that the FBI won't produce new conclusions. Again, this is a statement that was in response to the letter sent by FBI Director James Comey to 8 Republican committee chairmen in Congress. And he is the chairman for the Hillary campaign, the Hillary Clinton campaign for president.
Of course, and obviously the subject of all the WikiLeaks emails that had come out were largely associated with him. So at least
a lot of his emails were hacked, apparently.
So at least we know that this is sort of the first comment by her, from her campaign, since she did not mention it in that speech in Iowa. So obviously we're going to continue to monitor this. Talking about sort of the market impact here, not just from this, but I want to bring in another angle, which is the Fed, right? So you're talking about markets ultimately focusing on earnings, the growth, the economy. One part of that is definitely the Fed and interest rates. Does this kind of volatility, any election-related volatility, have the possibility to deter what is right now roughly about a 70% chance of a hike in December?
Well, the first thing it does, if there was any thought that the Fed was going to move in November, that's off the table. There's no reason for that to happen, certainly not before the election. I don't think so. I have not seen where WIRP is now, but I cannot imagine that it's moved materially.
It's ticked down a little bit.
A little bit, but basically what we've seen in the past
and
is
just 61%, sorry, to
actually, it's ticked down quite a bit. So it was about 72 yesterday. So we're down about 11% here.
Although this can fluctuate a lot very quickly.
Well, I'm looking at OIS, so perhaps you're looking at Fed funds futures. From yesterday, it was 64%, and then if you look at today, it is now 61%.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
So, but what we've seen in the past is when the market is pricing in a greater than, really 60 has been sort of the threshold in the past, that's when the Fed has felt more comfortable to go ahead and move. And the fact is that we don't expect a great sell-off in the markets either way following the election. There could be more volatility, absolutely. But again, when you look at market action like today, it tells you there's an underlying bid because the economy is strong, because earnings are good, and that's what's ultimately going to cause the Fed to move in December.
I wonder, Julian, what do you think the market was pricing in as far as the chances of a Brexit vote? And what do you think the market is pricing in right now as far as the chances of a Hillary Clinton win?
It's really difficult to handicap that. I mean, clearly, there's a difference.
Clearly, markets thought the Remain camp would win the Brexit vote.
No question about it. But what we would say there is that was an event that had never happened before. The thing about the presidential election is that we've had polling data for years and years and years. And again, we made the point coming into the October that the polling data was too close to call. And events obviously are going to make it a nail biter either way into the 8th.
Let's talk a little bit more focused on the equity market. We're obviously in a quarter here that's pretty solid for earnings. We're finally in that green area year over year in terms of growth. How does that impact where you project markets to go over the next 12 months, the sort of longer term?
Well, there's no question about the fact that there's a sense of relief that this quarter is actually shaping up to be better than expected and reinforces our view that 2017 is going to grow. But the other thing that we've seen that we're quite encouraged by is that bottoms-up estimates for 2017 were too high coming into the earnings season. The expectation was 14% growth. That is moderating.
EPS of like 133 as of a couple months ago.
Exactly. That's actually moderating, and the fact that the equity market has more or less taken that in stride as companies have walked down analyst views on 2017 is very encouraging for us.
Okay.
Does this give companies another reason to say that they have no visibility into what's going to happen next quarter? They've already relied on that quite a bit this earnings season.
It may, but I think that investors' attitude there is that that kind of attitude is likely to be punished. So I don't think you're going to see that incrementally greater.
All right, Julian Emanuel, UBS equity and derivative strategist, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we just want to reconfirm some headlines here, and also tell you that Bloomberg News has confirmed that we're reporting now that the emails that the FBI is looking into with connection to Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server has to do with Anthony Weiner's or a probe into Anthony Weiner, and therefore likely from his cell phone. The New York Times had reported this earlier. We continue to monitor the fallout from the FBI director's announcement that he's looking into new emails related to Hillary Clinton. This is Bloomberg. Scarlet, what'd you miss? Well, aside from politics, you may have missed the worst performer in the S&P 500. It is McKesson. It's a drug distributor, and it's seeing its biggest one-day drop since 1999. This is the BQ screen for Bloomberg. It's an old-school function here at Bloomberg, Bloomberg Quote, and it gives you a snapshot of everything here. And what I want to pay attention to is, of course, the moves down in the stock, because if you look at the GIP, the intraday chart, you could see it gapped lower right at the open after the company said in a conference call last night there's a price war going on. The company also cutting its full-year profit forecast. The CEO talking about an unnamed competitor that significantly undercut existing pricing and that McKesson was forced to respond. You can see here that the competitors like AmerisourceBergen, as well as some other names, Cardinal Health, declining by quite a bit as well.
All right, I have a look at Elect Go. It's a function on the Bloomberg that allows you to follow the campaign step by step. Obviously, today there's been a ton of news. The headlines are just rolling across the top. But what I wanted to look at was to zero in on this electoral map. 3 go, or you can just click here and you pull up an electoral map to see who's ahead in which states. Strong red is solid Trump, strong blue is solid Clinton, and then the gray areas are too close to call. So a toss-up in Ohio, a toss-up in Florida, a toss-up in Nevada and Arizona.
Surprising amount of gray there.
There is a surprising amount of gray.
And a toss-up in Texas, too.
It's a great way to look at what's going on in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia. It's just an interesting way to look at what's going on and who's ahead and who's behind in this breakdown.
All right, the market closes next. Take a look at the major indexes. We are now back in the red here with less than 4 minutes to go before the close. This is Bloomberg. Away from the closing bell. What'd you miss? U.S. stocks falling with Mexico's PESO after the FBI said it is reopening an investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of an unauthorized email server. Bonds rising while the dollar declined as traders paired their bets on a Fed rate increase this year. I'm Scarlet Fu.
I'm Matt Miller.
And I'm Oliver Rennick.
We want to welcome our viewers around the world who are tuning in live to Twitter right now. If you can ignore the Anthony Weiner tweets, you can watch us on Twitter every weekday from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Today's an epic day for Twitter, isn't it?
It is. And last time this week, you couldn't watch because Twitter was down, but we're going to talk about that later.
All right, let's begin with our market minutes right now. U.S. stocks were swinging in the afternoon, although swinging is kind of a generous term. They're fluctuating through most of the afternoon following the headlines that the FBI Director James Comey sent an email to members of Congress saying that he is looking into additional emails that have to do with Hillary Clinton. And, of course, he didn't give very much detail, but in the hours afterwards, we did get some more reporting that indicated that these emails were from Anthony Weiner's cell phone. Now, when it comes to markets, we saw a big leg lower for the Dow, for the NASDAQ, and the S&P 500. They came back. They kind of clawed back some of their losses. But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, the Dow finished little changed, and the S&P 500 lost 6 points off 0.3%. The NASDAQ declining by 0.5%.
I think it's important to note that the New York Times is saying the FBI got emails from Anthony Weiner's device, but also took Huma Abedin's device. And
good point.
Although Anthony Weiner is probably more fun to talk about and tweet about for sure, Huma probably is much closer, or definitely much closer to Hillary Clinton. So I think more interesting to see, to find out what she had on her device. Let's take a look at stocks right now. The IMAP will show you that we had about half and half winners and losers. The big winners were healthcare, energy, and big losers were healthcare, energy, and financials. The winners were industrials, consumer staples, and real estate. If you take a look at the big losers on the S&P, Scarlet was talking about McKesson earlier. After it disappointed, everybody in the group came down with it. So these are the top 3 percentage losers on the S&P.
Ugly.
McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, and Cardinal Health. Royal Caribbean up after positive third-quarter results, but also the CFO, interesting, said they're close to cruising Cuba.
Close.
So pretty soon you'll be able to get on a Royal Caribbean boat and go to Cuba.
I can think of other ways to get to Cuba that might be a little less cramped, but that's just your preference.
Sailing?
I think you can go through Mexico first. Right?
Swimming? Okay, I got it.
Anyway, let's talk about bonds. This is kind of a little bit of an interesting move because there was some strengthening in bonds today as yields moved down both on the 2 and the 10-year Treasury. This accelerated a little bit towards the end of the day, as Scarlett was just talking about those sort of market fluctuations surrounding the email news. About 1 p.m., 2 years pushed down further in the yield, as did the 10-year as well. So a little bit of strength there today as the market sold off, and you saw that kind of risk-off mentality come back in. Flipping over to the next one, I want to look at what's happening in Japan, though, because there's some pretty big moves here. The JGBs are kind of slowly creeping back to zero. They touched zero in September, and now they're kind of moving in that direction again today, where you had yields moving up a little bit. The 10-year in particular had a pretty big jump. Obviously, we're talking bonds here, so take the percentage with a grain of salt, but a 19% jump. 3 days of climbing yields in Japanese bonds.
All right, and in currencies, we need to focus here on the Mexican peso. The headline that the FBI is reopening its investigation sent the peso weaker. You can see that leg up. That is, of course, the dollar appreciating in value versus the Mexican peso. But since then, it's given back some of those losses, and the Mexican peso still weaker versus the dollar. In terms of the other major pairs, the dollar erased its gains versus the yen. As you see this move into perceived safe havens, and the real is worth mentioning as well because it was already the worst performer among emerging market currencies because of a decline in commodity prices. But once the FBI headline came out, just gave the dollar another leg up versus the Brazilian currency. Those are today's market minutes. Now, I want to read part of John Podesta's statement on the FBI reopening into the Hillary Clinton's private email server. John Podesta, of course, the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign for president. He says that upon completing this investigation more than 3 months ago, James Comey, the FBI director, declared no reasonable prosecutor would move forward with a case like this, and added that it was not even a close call. In the months since, Donald Trump and his Republican allies have been baselessly second-guessing the FBI, and in both public and private, browbeating the career officials there to revisit their conclusion in what he calls a desperate attempt to harm Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. He says FBI Director Comey should immediately provide the American public more information that is contained in the letter he sent to 8 Republican committee chairmen. It is extraordinary that we would see something like this just 11 days out from a presidential election. election. I want to bring in Eurasia Group's Ian Bremmer now, who joins us by phone. Ian, there's so many places to start, but why don't we begin with with Director James Comey's disclosure that they're looking into emails. Was this a responsible thing for Comey to do?
Well, I doubt he had much of a choice. I mean, first of all, the fact that he's aware of emails that would have materially contradicted the testimony that he gave in the investigation in Congress requires him to make that disclosure. And, not only would it be politically delegitimizing for him and the FBI to hold on to it beyond the elections if they eventually found out about it. But frankly, with that kind of information, it's pretty likely that it would have leaked from within the FBI very soon anyway. So I suspect his hand was forced. Having said that, there's still, big questions about what exactly is in, sort of these emails that have come from Anthony Weiner and how they connect to Hillary, how they connect to Huma Abedin, and in what way they contradict his testimony. What we've seen from the FBI so far is they don't believe that this is going to get concluded before the election, and of course that creates all sorts of opportunities for Donald Trump to cause trouble around it.
Ian, if you could kind of elaborate a little bit more on what possible mandate, I guess, Comey and the FBI has to continue to look into this and obviously inform Congress as well, which is what got the message out. Because it seems like from the PODESTA statement that the Clinton camp is going to make the case that this is, by some degree, politically motivated. But on the other end, does Comey have some sort of mandate to keep the people, informed to a certain extent, or is that just not part of his job?
He has mandate to keep Congress informed, certainly, because, again, he's the one that gave testimony under oath. If suddenly new emails from a separate investigation of the sexting case and what looks to be potentially a felony sexting case of Anthony Weiner with this underage girl leads to the FBI getting additional material information that shows that Comey, that contradicts Comey's testimony, he's absolutely required to bring that up to Congress, which is, again, what he clearly did. And, once you bring that up to Congress, it's going to get out. It's going to become public. There's no question about it. So, again, I find certainly if you are John Podesta, if you're Hillary Clinton, if you're in the Clinton camp, given that there's less than 2 weeks to go, there's no reason not to say this is political, this is unethical, because the final information may not come out, and you're trying to do everything possible to dodge, deflect, and attack. The more that there's uncertainty and there's debate among the people that are actually covering this case, the more that people are going to say, oh, the FBI did something wrong, that makes it easier for them to get through the next 2 weeks. But I see no choice for the director of the FBI but to take the action that he's taken.
Ian, we already know from Comey's testimony previously that Hillary Clinton was sending classified emails using a private server. But it seems he gave her kind of the benefit of the doubt since, half of the country wants to vote for her to be president of the United States. What could be in there that's worse than that?
Well, the question is not about what's worse. The question is what's in Comey's testimony that these emails contradict.
I see.
Was there an occasion, for an example, where either Huma or Hillary were aware of certain types of classified information or timing of that or when it was labeled classified that was lied about during the investigation? That kind of thing would lead to this. It's not as if the American public is not aware that this server was inappropriate and by all means illegal. It's very clear, I think, to the American public that the Hillary Clinton and her campaign did everything possible to obfuscate that to the American people. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily a smoking gun here, except for the fact that this case is now, even though the investigation is not necessarily reopened, the case is effectively open, right? What you thought was basically in the past is now going to continue through the elections, and especially because it's involving Anthony Weiner, involving Huma Abedin, people that, Donald Trump and his campaign have been going after consistently since the sexting cases have gone up. This is great grist for Trump to take a lot of the news cycles over the course of the next week and a half, and that is meaningful in terms of the election. I personally think they're in an enormously deep hole. It's going to be incredibly hard for them to dig out of it with them so far behind in terms of ground game, with the Republican Party deciding they're no longer supporting his campaign and instead going to support Senate, going to support House races. But it's absolutely meaningful in terms of the overall outcomes of a lot of those races across the country, and it's going to inject more uncertainty into the race overall.
Right. And I just want to point out that Chris Kruger of Cowen Company, he's a political analyst, was responding to the latest breaking news. And he says that past his prologue, Trump will overplay a strong hand. When the media spotlight is on Clinton, Trump's numbers tend to improve, although he is almost clinically immune, Matt, from allowing someone else to monopolize coverage.
That's interesting. I wonder, though, how much it matters what Trump does. Ian, what kind of parallel can you draw between what we saw happen in Great Britain with the Brexit vote? Markets were pricing in a Remain win. Obviously, that didn't go down the way we all thought it would. It looks like markets right now are pricing in a Clinton win. What are the chances that this goes the way that went?
Well, it's much less likely, and although, I do accept that there's a very large parallel to be drawn, because in both the case of Trump and the case of Brexit, it's fundamentally a protest vote. It's not because the British electorate believed that Brexit was going to help them. It's they wanted to protest against the entire establishment, the media, the bankers, the CEOs, and the political parties on both sides. That's certainly emblematic of Trump supporters as well. The difference is that in the United States, the left has been much more coherent and cohesive. You've got Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, everybody else on the progressive side of the Democratic Party, not necessarily enamored with Hillary, but certainly in the never Trump camp. And also, British demographics, over 90% of the voting public, well over it, white. In the United States, Hispanic. In the United States, Black. In the United States, Asian. All populations that are extremely opposed to Donald Trump and his campaign. Let's also be clear that the amount of scandals around Trump on every front, have exceeded what we've seen around Hillary, who, would probably lose to just about any other Republican candidate, but not Hillary, but not Trump himself. So yeah, I think it's unlikely.
So it's not that delicate.
Stage, yeah.
You're saying it's not that delicate because I wonder, Ian, how important turnout is in the Brexit vote. One of the big problems for the Remain camp is that a lot of those voters assumed they would win and just didn't go. And I think that, and I wonder what you think about the Clinton camp. Clinton. Would-be Clinton voters saying, I figure she's going to win. I vote in New York anyway. I might as well not even show up.
Brexit is a special referendum that is just about that. Harder to get people to turn out off cycle in that way. A presidential election in the United States, more consistent in that regard. People aren't just electing the president. There are a lot of referendums around the country that are attached to them. Things like marijuana legalization and the rest, lots of spending issues that matter to people locally. There are congressional issues, House and Senate. All of these things play. And, of course, there's also a lot of early voting. I'm not saying this doesn't matter. It clearly matters. I just think it matters a lot more for the down-ballot voting, for the Senate races, which are very close, could go either way, could switch to the Dems or could stay Republican. Right. This helps stay Republican. And the House race where the Republicans can lose fewer seats as a consequence of Trump being able to swing the narrative towards the GOP over the last 2 weeks of this race.
Ian, just real quickly, is Clinton right to not address it in her speech in Iowa and just kind of go through Podesta?
I don't know about that. I think people want to hear from Hillary on this issue. She's not going to be able to avoid it for long. She's right if she doesn't have her speaking points down. We know that historically Hillary doesn't lie well. She comes across as overly scripted and defensive. They're going to want to practice with her. So I suspect she'll do a lot better if she goes through this 5, 6, 10 times before she actually has to take it from the field. It appears that there wasn't Wi-Fi on the plane, which surprises me if that's true. That's what I've heard reported. But I mean, if they were really caught flat-footed on this issue when they landed, I'm not surprised that her people didn't want her taking questions until they had a chance to get ahead of the story.
All right, Ian Bremmer, president of Eurasia Group, joining us by phone. Thank you so much for your perspective. Matt?
All right, it's been a busy day, but the question is, what'd you miss? The fastest U.S. growth in 2 years failed to resolve the debate. Is the world's largest economy emerging from an extended funk? Plus, more on why the FBI has decided to further investigate Hillary Clinton's private email use less than 2 weeks before the presidential election. How is this moving markets and the polls? And millions lost access to some of the world's most popular websites last week. Oliver referenced that with Twitter. We'll talk the state of cybersecurity with the CEO of Red Balloon Security. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some more perspective on the developing story regarding the FBI reopening of an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Jonathan Bernstein is a Bloomberg View columnist. He also taught political science at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and he joins us now on the phone. Jonathan, what do you make of, there's kind of an argument going on right now. Was it wrong and almost political in a way for James Comey to reopen this investigation in such a public way with a letter to Congress, or did he have no other choice because he may have perjured himself in previous testimony after seeing new information?
Well, I don't think he perjured himself, but he did make a commitment to Congress about his investigation. There's new information, so he did seem to have an obligation to update them. He also probably was concerned about the FBI's reputation if it turns out after the election that there was more to the investigation that he had not revealed. So I think he probably had an obligation to do something. It's not clear that what he actually, the letter he wrote, was very wise.
Right. The letter that he wrote was 3 paragraphs, and it didn't really give any specifics. Consequent reporting from the New York Times and from Bloomberg have indicated that these emails are not from Hillary Clinton's email server, not even her emails, but rather Anthony Weiner's emails in a separate case that the FBI is pursuing. Why would the FBI not include that kind of information?
It's a good question. Right now we have no information. We know what we're talking about now, that they seem to be either Anthony Weiner's emails or his wife's emails, who's a Clinton staffer. We don't know what the emails say. Perhaps this is an email saying, "Hey, here's where we hid all the good stuff," or perhaps it's an email saying, "Boy, I'm not sure that the Libya intervention was very wise," and they have to go check and see whether something classified was in that email. This could turn out to be a big nothing. Could turn out not to be a big nothing. We don't really know.
Jonathan, so you talk about nothing in terms of the content of the emails. I'm wondering about what Matt has asked a few times now, is whether or not it's going to sort of excite people on either part of the candidates sides to go out and vote. A poll is just crossing here showing an Emerson poll showing Clinton leads in Michigan and Pennsylvania. It's a close race in New Hampshire. So perhaps not everything is written off quite yet. Is this the type of thing that Trump needs to really invigorate his supporters, who have been subjected to several weeks now of a conversation that has assumed that Trump is pretty much done?
It seems very unlikely to me that this changes anything. Most voters by this point are either Clinton voters or Trump voters. We've had 16-some million people already have voted, because early voting and absentee voting has been going on. Vote by mail has been going on. Unless there's significant new news, it's not too likely this is going to make much of a difference to the election.
If that's the case, and we presume that Hillary Clinton goes on to win the election because she was leading in polls before this FBI headline, what does this do to her mandate after the election is over? How much can she really get done?
Again, it depends on what happens. It's very likely that this is a nothing, that they look at the emails, they find out there's nothing to it, or if there is something, somebody else associated with Clinton did something with classified information they shouldn't have, or maybe there's nothing at all in it. And it goes away. It's forgotten. Plenty of things happen especially towards the end of the campaign, especially maybe on a Friday afternoon, that seem like big deals, which we forget about within days, and certainly within months by the time new president sworn in January.
Days would be better than months for her, obviously. Jonathan, when we asked Ian Bremer just now why she didn't address this issue, it came out while she was on the plane. She then landed. Reporters asked her questions. She gave an entire stump speech without mentioning it one time. Ian said, well, she doesn't lie well historically, and they're going to work on that with her.
No, they're going to work on handling how she talks about it.
Well, the direct quote was, she doesn't lie well historically. They're going to have to work on that with her. Right? And here's the thing. I know that sounds bad, but isn't that the risk that she runs by completely ignoring this when she's giving a speech to hundreds or thousands of voters who know what's happening and doesn't say anything about it?
No. Again, we in the news media, we who follow this stuff very closely, it matters a lot whether she speaks to it now versus 20 minutes from now versus 2 hours from now. Most normal people are coming home from work on a Friday afternoon. They're not even flipping on the news necessarily. They're going to see this sideways as they're working out in the gym over the weekend and see a headline on Bloomberg or something. They're not going to care whether she addressed it right away or not. It's always smartest for campaigns to wait till they actually know the facts before the candidate speaks. That's
a really good point. Jonathan Bernstein, Bloomberg View columnist with some much-needed perspective. Thank you so much for joining us by phone. The rise of private jets, we talked about that a little bit earlier, the rise of private jets.
We did. You could see that at your local gas station.
All right. We'll be right back with more. This is Bloomberg. I'm Scarlet. What'd you miss? A chart that's courtesy of Deutsche Bank's Joe Lavorgnan, the chief U.S. economist. We're going to take a deep dive now into the Bloomberg. You can find all the charts using the function at the bottom of the screen. And this is in response to requests for scary charts or charts that scare our guests and our customers. You know, because it's Halloween soon. And this is the chart that we've picked, or that Joe Lavorgnan picked. It is the household net worth as a percentage of disposable income. And it's a ratio. So when the line goes up, wealth is rising relative to income. And you are seeing certainly a huge pickup over the last 3 years. The last times that has happened was in the dot-com bubble, of course, in the late 90s, and in the mid-2000s during the housing bubble. So some uncomfortable comparisons there.
All right, and we got a bunch of charts from some really smart people. Who do you have, Neil Dutta?
No, I've got Torsten Slok.
You have Slok. Okay, yes. I have Michael Feroli here from J.P. Morgan, and this chart shows net domestic investment divided by GDP. You can find it on the Bloomberg terminal at #BTV4583.
Here it is.
We're pulling it up here. I think it's a fascinating look at how little domestic investment that we've got. As the ratio falls, it's smaller compared to GDP. Of course, it dropped. All of these red horizontal lines are recessions. This chart goes all the way back to the 40s, believe it or not. It's a big, long chart. But obviously, we see the biggest drop in domestic investment right after the Great Recession, the worst since the Depressions. That's what you expect. It doesn't really recover much into 2016, so that's a problem for this economy.
I like any good chart that has the recession curves on it, which is a great thing you can do on the terminal just by adding a study.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to stay on this economy theme because coming up next, GDP in the third quarter grew 2.9%. The three charts you can't miss ahead of Jobs Day and next week's FOMC. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton. Let's get to First Word News. Donald Trump is praising the FBI's decision to investigate new emails found in the probe of Hillary Clinton's private server. The Republican nominee addressed a crowd in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Hillary Clinton's corruption is on a scale we have never seen before. We must not let her take her criminal scheme into the Oval Office.
Clinton's campaign chairman John Podesta calls on FBI Director James Comey to provide more details on that investigation. Election Day is still a week and a half away, but more than 15 million Americans have already voted early. Among the emerging trends, Democrats are casting ballots with greater intensity in North Carolina and Colorado, while Republicans appear to have an early advantage in Ohio and Iowa. There's also a surge of early voting in the swing state of Florida. The Federal Aviation Administration has ordered flights at Chicago's O'Hare Airport on hold after an American Airlines plane there caught fire. An FAA spokesman says American Airlines Flight 383 departed Chicago for Miami this afternoon when it blew a tire and damaged an engine. He says the pilot aborted the takeoff and everyone was evacuated. No injuries were reported. The United Nations today voted Russia off the Human Rights Council. It was a stunning rebuke for the country, which is accused of war crimes over its actions in Syria. Russia lost its regional seat to Hungary and Croatia. The country's UN ambassador Vitaly Churkin played down the importance of the loss. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Scarlet, back to you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Let's get a recap of today's market action. Investors pricing in some more uncertainty related to the election. You can see the Dow Industrials finishing little changed, off by almost 9 points. The S&P losing 0.3%, actually closing at a 6-week low, with stocks erasing their gains from earlier in the day following the FBI announcement that it has reopened its probe into her use of an unauthorized email server. Of course, the currency pair that nicely encapsulates this is the dollar Mexican peso. And you can see here the dollar surging in value versus the peso because as Donald Trump's odds of winning perhaps increase, the peso generally tends to weaken.
What'd you miss? U.S. third quarter GDP grew 2.9%. You actually may have forgotten this because it happened 100 years ago at 8:30 this morning.
5 news cycles ago.
This could potentially bolster the FOMC to raise rates right after the election. Bloomberg's Matt Boesler has the 3 charts you've got to see about this because it seems like great news. 2.9%. It's like cause to celebrate, right? The economy's really bouncing back. So strong.
That's right. Of course, there are always caveats. And even though we did have the fastest growth in several quarters in Q3, of course, the big caveat was that it was all from the volatile trade and inventories components. And so the consumer aspect kind of actually softened a little bit. And that's what people are homing in on. So. And, yeah, I did bring you some charts, and the first one is actually not from the GDP report. It's from the University of Michigan's consumer survey on inflation expectations.
So I've got this one here on my terminal. It's number 4628 if you want to play along at home. #BTV 4628. Really not good from the consumer's perspective.
Right, and the reason I want to highlight this one is because I think this is probably actually the more important data than anything from the GDP release today in terms of Fed policy. Because if you look at this chart, it's at a record low. And if inflation expectations were not at a record low, the conversation at the table at the Fed would be very different right now. You would probably have a lot more willingness to raise interest rates.
So just to clarify for viewers, the white line is what survey participants expect, right?
So the blue line shows the median respondent to the University of Michigan consumer survey's expected inflation 5 to 10 years from now. And the white line shows just college-educated respondents.
I see.
And so I'm highlighting the white line because college-educated respondents are really the ones who have been driving this decline in inflation expectations lately. Lesser-educated folks have slightly higher inflation expectations, and those are still holding up, but the sort of less noisy college-educated.
When they're queried about this, is it like how much do you think you're going to have to pay for stuff in 5 to 10 years, or how much do you think you're going to get paid in 5 to 10 years, right? Because those are two, I'd like the answer to those two things to be very different.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Actually, so there's 2 separate questions on that. This is the former where it's about prices. The other question is about wages. And then there's also a question that looks 5 years ahead about your financial situation. What do you think your financial situation is going to be like in 5 years? And that was some really good news from the report today. We got a new record high in the percentage of young people 18 to 34 who expect to be in a better financial situation 5 years from now, 86%. So that's very good news. So at least looking ahead into the medium term, there's definitely options.
So they feel like they're going to get paid okay, just stuff is going to be cheaper.
That's right. And actually, when you look
that's a Goldilocks scenario, right?
So for the Fed, it's kind of interesting because they're looking at this and they're saying, well, we're trying to hit our inflation target, and this might prevent us from doing that. But absolutely, in terms of the general vibe you get from the consumer surveys, when inflation expectations go down, that's not necessarily a bad thing from the consumer's perspective.
All right. And of course, we need to talk about wage growth as well, because along with GDP at 8:30, we also got the Employment Cost Index, which is the Federal Reserve's preferred way of looking at wage growth. What did we learn there?
Yeah, so the Employment Cost Index really tries to look at how do wages for the same job change over time, as opposed to an individual who's moving through jobs, maybe getting promoted, getting paid more, that sort of thing. And this is really the last indicator. This is the white line on the chart here, and this is the last indicator that we really haven't seen much of a pickup in wage growth yet. And so we've been waiting to see it. We obviously didn't get it this quarter. As you can see, it kind of ticked down a little bit.
To 2.4%.
Right. These are wages and salaries of private industry workers. Now, the measure that a lot of people like to cite in terms of where wage growth is rising is this Atlanta Fed measure of
the blue line.
Median hourly earnings, which kind of tracks the same individuals, kind of tries to strip out some of the composition effects in terms of, the labor market. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether, maybe this white line does pick up next quarter and start to follow that higher, or have we kind of gotten to a point where wage growth is starting to slow down? Two very mixed signals from these two.
Did it roll over, or is it just pausing?
Right.
All right, so some negative stuff there, but it's Friday, so let's talk about tobacco and pills.
That's right.
Right? All right, no,
I don't know how to read that.
This is a chart. No, I didn't bring it. Matt brought it. It's got tobacco and pills. So you're looking at a component of GDP here. You're basically looking at this blue line here, which is other non-durable goods dragging down GDP. You can see that ticking down there. On top here is the GDP number. What does this mean? It looks relative to its own history a pretty big move down. Is that putting a drag on the number right now?
Yeah, it's putting a huge drag on the number. So that was a 3 standard deviation downward move, very unusual. And you can see the white line is actual overall personal consumption. So this is the consumer part of GDP that we really care about. And you can see that tick down in the third quarter. But a lot of that was because of this big drop in the blue line, which you could just subtract from that to kind of take that out. And the blue line is spending on other non-durable goods, and that decreased in Q3. So what's other non-durable goods? If you dig into that category a little bit more, the two things that were really dragging that lower were spending on pharmaceutical products and also spending on tobacco. And so that's pretty interesting because, we hear about all of these rising healthcare costs, right? That's what's really exploding in the inflation data. And that's actually why, part of the reason why real inflation-adjusted spending on pharmaceuticals looks to have dropped. So it's not clear if, we're actually just buying less drugs or if the inflation data are so much higher than, what is actually happening that it's making it look like we're spending less on drugs. Not clear, but either way, that had a big impact on the headline GDP data today. So it's something to keep in mind and keep an eye out for.
And actually good news in almost an ironic twist to Oliver's take on it, right?
That's right.
If we're spending less money on tobacco, surely that's good news. And depending on the pills, also.
Yeah, perhaps, especially the tobacco, down 5% from a year ago. So
depending on the pills, whether they're life-saving pills or
depending on what they are on a Friday, yeah.
All right, Bloomberg's Matt Bozer, thank you so much for joining us today.
And coming up, millions lost access to some of the world's most popular websites last week. We'll talk about the state of cybersecurity with the CEO of Red Balloon Security next. This is Bloomberg.
right, we need to get back to that breaking news on the U.S. election. The FBI Director James Comey now saying he is looking into new emails that's related to the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private server while she was Secretary of State. And of course, this comes just 11 days before Election Day. It's a stunning development. It's got Democrats and Republicans agreeing that the FBI needs to reveal more about these newly discovered emails, and quickly. We spoke earlier with Bloomberg Politics Managing Editor Mark Halperin about the FBI's handling of this case. Here's what he said.
The FBI should do its arguing in court. If they want to bring an indictment, bring an indictment. If they don't, they should follow normal procedure and not release investigative materials, not announce there's a reopening. What's the point of that? If you've got a grand jury, you keep that secret. If you want to indict someone, indict them and speak in court.
Right.
But this writing letters and putting out FBI interview
and letting
summaries,
the media speculate, letting people speculate.
I will never understand it. And I'd like the guy, if he says, I need to be accountable, I'd like him to have a press conference, not make a statement, and have a press conference. You know, he answered questions from Congress. But I went to that hearing and I sat behind him for 6 hours to try to get one question to him, and he refused to answer. He's not answered, to my knowledge, a single question about this investigation. He's not being transparent, and yet he's interfering with the election. Today, I listened to Rush Limbaugh right when this news broke. Rush Limbaugh's like, this changes the whole race. He's getting up the hopes of people. Right. This isn't what the election should be about if he doesn't have some legal case to make.
Something
and yet
substantive.
It is now. Right.
So who is advising him, and who can come down on him and say, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Director Comey, you got to fix this.
No one seems to have intervened with him in the period up until today. His biggest critics before were Republicans. Today, I think they're probably delighted with James Comey. So I don't know that anybody's going to criticize him for this.
That was Mark Halperin, managing editor of Bloomberg Politics. Mark and John Heilman will continue to follow this story tonight on With All Due Respect. Tune in at 5 p.m. New York time, right here on Bloomberg.
What'd you miss? Millions of people lost access to some of the world's most popular websites last week. Hackers launched a distributed denial of service attack on an internet infrastructure company that provides services linked to websites like Twitter and the New York Times, which were both unavailable for up to hours in some cases. Joining us now to break down what exactly happened and the state of cybersecurity is Red Balloon Security CEO and Chief Scientist Ong Hui. Ong, thanks so much for coming. This is very complicated stuff to a simpleton like myself when it comes to security and the internet. What exactly happened last Friday?
Okay, so what happened was there was, like you said, a very large distributed denial of service attack against very specific servers that make the internet work, right? So, I'm sure you've noticed Twitter and things like that wasn't available. Right. But that in itself wasn't really interesting. We've seen DDoS attacks against the exact same servers over and over again. This is something that we've been dealing with for more than a decade. The really interesting thing about this specific attack is what devices made that attack happen. So usually when you think about DDoS, you think about botnets, you think about computers being hacked.
There's like a network of computers that all sort of share the same.
Right. So you're thinking about laptops, desktops, servers, right? So what happened this time was none of those things were involved. The DDoS attack originated from IP cameras, set-top boxes, DVRs, and tiny little computers that we typically don't think of as computers.
My Nest thermostat.
It could very well be
Twitter.
Nest. Yeah, absolutely.
Do we know, is there one culprit? Is there one consumer product that they were using more than any others?
No, actually, so this was not targeting any specific embedded device. They were doing the very simple thing of looking for devices that had default passwords.
When something like this happens and you have websites down like Twitter, the New York Times, and it hits so many different places, who goes after the people that launched this attack? Is it possible to find out who did it? Is it possible to take action against them?
Absolutely. Well, cybersecurity professionals like myself, right, we spend a lot of our time thinking about ways of detecting this type of attack and ways of defending against this type of attack, right? So the big problem here is, unlike your traditional DDoS attack, we're talking about attacks being leveraged from tiny little embedded devices, right? And there's not a clear technology out there that can actually defend those devices like we typically put, for example, antivirus on your laptop, right? There's nothing like that available right now for these embedded devices. And do you know how many embedded devices we have on the planet right now?
A lot.
Name a number. What do you think? Like 100 million?
Billions.
5 billion.
22 billion by this year. Okay, it's projected to be 50 billion by 2020, right? So we're now stuck with an entire globe of billions and billions of these vulnerable devices with no clear technology to defend them against this. So this attack really is going to be the shape of things to come. This is not the last time you're going to see embedded devices bringing down large pieces of the internet.
Can they? I mean, we're talking about the Internet of Things, right? Which John Chambers used to always talk about, and you know, Cisco has still got a lot to do with. Can't some huge company like that figure out a security solution for these things in the internet that aren't laptops, personal computers, or servers?
That's actually a really great question. So you don't need to be a huge company to figure this problem out. In fact, my company, Red Balloon Security, is the reason why we exist is to defend all of these billions of vulnerable embedded devices on the planet. You don't have to go to the Ciscos of the world. And, you know, for example, think about this. You know, if Cisco comes up with a solution that protects Cisco devices, right, what does that say about, you know, all the other vendors that make all the other things? What does it say about Nest, right? So that technology isn't going to be able to protect every single embedded device in exactly the same way. And that's what Red Balloon Security does.
So could you go to Scarlet's house and figure out, okay, she's got a Nest, she's got a baby camera, she's got a DVR, she's got all of these different things, and figure out one solution for the Scarlet Fu household?
For Scarlet, yes, absolutely. But for everyone else on this planet, that's exactly the purpose of our technology, to be able to put the same security features into the billions of different devices that we don't fully understand, but is obviously very insecure and is exploitable.
You know, last week, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos spoke about hacking at the Vanity Fair New Establishment Summit. Let's take a listen.
One of the great issues of our age is going to be privacy, you know, people don't think about it, but if you have a mobile phone in your pocket, it has microphones on it, and those microphones are under software control, and I would posit to you that just about any nation state in the world worth its salt can put a computer virus on your phone anytime they want and listen to everything you say from your cell phone.
It's unlikely that people will stop using their cell phone, but does this retard innovation in any way? Will this make us more reluctant to use self-driving vehicles?
And they shouldn't, right? That's the job of cybersecurity professionals. Our job is to make sure that we have the defenses that are necessary in order for these technologies to exist in the world, right? So we shouldn't, you know, shy away from using technology, but we have to make sure that this technology is actually safe to use.
All right, great stuff. Ankwi, thanks so much. You are the chief scientist and CEO at Red Balloon Security, talking with us about that attack last week. And it kind of sounds scary, like there might be more to come.
All right, coming up on What'd You Miss? When politics and rock and roll intersect, I asked Hillary Clinton supporter John Bon Jovi for his opinions on this election year.
The candidates love playing high-energy ballads at their campaigns to get the crowd going. What Bon Jovi song should Mrs. Clinton play on election night at the Javits Center?
Wow. This house is not for sale.
There you go. There's a shameless plug.
Bang.
What about the Trump campaign? What Bon Jovi song should they play?
It's a wonderful world, because it goes to show you that anybody has the chance to be the president of the United States.
What'd you miss? John Bon Jovi is one of the world's top rock stars who spread his wings to football, politics, and philanthropy. I sat down with the star at the Bloomberg Trade Book Charity Day here in New York and started by asking him what inspired his setting up a business offering superfan experience packages.
This business became a place for people to think of it as a cruise on land. They could go visit places in the world with a common thread of their favorite entertainer, whoever that might be, and come together in this place. I was doing a lot of business with the NFL already anyhow, and they were spinning off a business and came to me and asked me to be a partner in it, and it's called On Location. And what we were doing was taking tickets out of the hands of brokers and getting them back to fans where they were transparent. And when I told the league, I said, guys, you have to think outside the parking lot. I had their undivided attention.
How do you make these events, whether it's live concerts, whether it's games or the tailgate party at the parking lot, inclusive yet accessible? Because
there's different levels.
Have gone
there's
out
different
of
levels. They are out of control. Now, in truth, you know, it's not for everybody. There are some people that have access to A and some people who have access to C. But that is a price point, and that is, yes, that is the truth. But we offer transparency, and here's a great example of why On Location is so great. The shorting of tickets just a couple years ago when my Patriots played against the Seahawks in Arizona. Johnny saves up his money and takes his son and goes to the Super Bowl. He has bought a ticket from a broker and thinks he's going to the game. The tickets were shorted and they weren't available. And Dad's disappointed and the son's heartbroken. We're telling you months in advance where your seats are, what you paid for them, and how you got them. We're telling you where your tickets are, your hotel is, and what parties you're going to.
Now, this week, speaking of the Super Bowl, you denied rumors that you're in the market to buy the Tennessee Titans. And we know that 2 years ago, you were part of a group that bid unsuccessfully for the Buffalo Bills. Are you in the market to buy an NFL team?
Sure. You know, I mean, yeah. I, along with two other partners, did make a bid, a substantial bid for the Buffalo Bills. We ultimately didn't get it. It was a sealed bid, sole reason why, in truth, we didn't get it. The Tennessee Titans are not for sale. Quite simple. You know, the team is not for sale.
Well, why is being an NFL owner a logical step for you down the road?
I love the game and I love the business of the game. And I do believe that, I have something unique to bring to it.
The music industry has seen a huge disruption. We've gone from CDs to digital downloads and now streaming. A lot of young people don't feel like they should have to pay for any music. They can just get it for free. What will a successful band's business model look like in 5 years?
For the younger generation, it's going to be harder for one of them to sit in this seat someday and say, I sold 130 million albums. The model has changed. They're going to have to tour. They're not going to be able to do it on the level that I do it at because we've been out there doing it for 30 plus years. So what I don't want to happen is that people's thinking the genie's out of the bottle, I don't have to pay for it. Here's something that I firmly believe. The arts are interdependent. Music, movies, books, and art, as we know it, fine art, are inspired by each other. If we continue to just take it and give it away, it's going to be harder and harder for those people to create it and have a living doing it. They teach us what happened in the past. They are our history lessons. Paintings are our history. Movies and books and music do the same thing.
Do you think that content and distribution should go together the way that AT&T and Time Warner want to tie up?
Well, I'd hate to create more and more monopolies in the world. These things are going to have to be scrutinized, aren't they? But, you know, and that's difficult. I'd love to see artists be paid. I'd love to see copyrights be protected. You know, this goes back generations and decades when there's brown bags and you know, the stories of the singer getting $5,000 and told, here's your car, you're out of the, you know, we own you.
What you missed, the FBI is reopening its investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, and stocks fell. Don't miss this. Coming up on Wednesday, the Fed decision.
And don't miss the Bank of England rate decision. That's next Thursday.
I got a jobs report on Friday.
All right, that does it for What You Missed.
I'm John Heilman.
And I'm Mark Halpern. With all due respect to James Comey, really? Once again, it's Friday, and once again, as if on cue, this presidential race has been rocked by another head-scratching, reality-bending M. Night